Hi, my name is Jerome Pittman of Harford Men United, of Harford Memorial Baptist Church in Detroit. And if you signed in for this class, I want to make sure that we give it some perspective and context so that you can appreciate where we are intending to go with this and how you will be involved. You may be interested to know how we came up with the name of the class, Grave Matters. Well, let me first say that I was a student in a class called Grave Matters years ago, and it was so impactful upon me and the other students in the class that we were moved to action. We were moved to do something with the material that was presented to us. And that is exactly what we want to do with this group, with this session. In fact, Harford Men United, one of our themes for this year and the last few years has been faith in action. So we want to move from contemplation, move from thinking, and into action on a topic that many people like to avoid. I can be truthful with you that I avoided it myself for many, many years. But finally, I came to realize that it's really an act of love. It's an act of compassion. It's an act of caring for those people who are closest to us, who must deal with our situations when we pass from this life. Now, when I was a youngster, I heard a saying, and you probably heard it too, there's nothing more certain in life than death and taxes. And while that may be true, and if you may or may not believe it, certainly the piece on death is true. And if those of you who are inclined to go to scripture for guidance on this topic, I have a few scriptures that I want to share with you to emphasize the certainty of death and, more importantly, how we can plan for it. So, my first scripture is from the Ecclesiastes writer, and it is taken from Ecclesiastes 3, the first two verses. It reads, "There is time for everything, a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die." The psalmist wrote in Psalm 39, verse 5 and 6, a similar scripture, and it reads as this wise, "Each man's life is but a breath. Man is a mere phantom as he goes to and fro. He bustles about, but only in vain. He heaps up wealth, not knowing who will get it." So, hopefully those scriptures will confirm to you the certainty of death if you needed that. But we don't want to just stop right there. As I mentioned, we want to move to faith in action. And we want to inspire you to not just accept death as something that is inevitable, that nothing that you can plan for or do anything about, but we want to encourage you to think about how you can leave a legacy and not a burden. In fact, if there was a mantra for this class, that's exactly what it would be. I'm going to leave a legacy to those behind me and not a burden. You might say, well, what is the scriptural basis for that? Well, I have a few. The Ecclesiastes writer came back and said in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 11, wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing. Or you might say, inheritance, like wisdom, is a good thing. The proverbial writer, the writer of Proverbs 17:2, who was King Solomon, one of the wisest men that we know of in biblical times, wrote, "A wise servant will rule over a disgraceful son and will share the inheritance as one of the brothers." Well, what do you take from that? What I take is that we're not to judge those whom we love. We still must or should take advantage of leaving them an inheritance so that we can generate wealth for them to help them in their life and their life pursuits. It is indeed an act of love. Finally, and there's a scripture that probably many of you have already heard or heard many times before, and it reads, Proverbs 13:2, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for righteousness. Well, what do we take from that? Well, what I take, and what I hope you will take away, is that we have a responsibility to build generational wealth. In our community, one of the things that we really need to focus on is building generational wealth that we can pass on to our children and our children's children and thereon. We're not starting from an equal point with others who are unlike us, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start and make a concerted effort to build up generational wealth. Well, this class, the format of this class will help to get us moving in that direction. We will share with you through the use of professionals in their appointed areas of professionalism, tips and ideas, thoughts, and points of how you can get started and what you might focus on. It is not our intent to overwhelm you, for there will be a lot of information that we will share. It is not our intent to come back and test you and ask you to repeat what we have shared with you in a quizzical kind of way. We really want to move you to action. And we believe that having heard what our professionals will share with you, and they will share with you in the areas of end-of-life planning, insurance, wills, trusts, and legal documents, financial planning. These are some of the areas that you might have questions about, but we will certainly try to plant the seed so that you will either be able to answer those questions or you will know who you can contact for answers. So let's get started. We're going to move into action, and we're going to start with our next professional who will lead the next module of the Grave Matters class. I will be coming back at the end of the modules to wrap it up and prepare for you sort of a summary checklist of those things that you will have heard about in the earlier modules. So thank you, and let's get started.
Father, you help me see the light.
My name is David Akins. I've been a funeral director for the last 37 years. I've been operating my own facility for 35 of those years. I've always looked at my work as ministry and thought that God called me into this ministry as a young child of 10 years old when I had my first true experience with death, with the death of my grandmother. I never knew anything about funeral service, never had been to any funeral, but from that moment, participating in that homegoing service for my grandmother, the seed was planted. As I said, I felt my calling was for this particular ministry.
What's the number one thing that you seeing amongst our people that are not prepared for this moment?
That's the number one thing I see. We're not prepared. And I try to emphasize that because we see it happen in our family situations, and we hear about it from others that we're in contact with about a certain individual has passed away, and the family has no idea what their preferences are, what they would like to happen, or even where to begin to start to put together what we are calling a final homegoing celebration or a life of celebration for an individual. So, and one of the harder parts that I found is the people really, as I said earlier, they don't plan for death. Everybody expects to live, and they expect to live forever. And as a result, when death does come, whether expected or unexpected, we're always in a state of confusion because no one knows what. And the act of prearranging is such a simple act. And it's a wonderful act of love that we can show and prepare for this day by helping our families to just take a few minutes and talk about it. And if you can't verbalize and talk about it, just simply write things down. Notes are an excellent roadmap to helping people navigate where should we be going and what should we be considering when it comes to his departure or her departure. Uh, the average person does not believe in the paying of insurance because they say, well, I'll be dead, so I don't have to worry about it. That's somebody else's burden. And what we're trying to do here is attempt to avoid that kind of situation for anybody by simply taking the necessary precautions and steps. Life insurance is so easy to get, but you'll find that many of our people would be more inclined to pay a high cable bill versus paying a small amount for a monthly life insurance premium. It just doesn't make sense, but it's the way a lot of our families and our people and our culture roll. Um, I think sometimes we get frightened by what we think because we know that insurance can be costly in their mind. Sometimes we get sticker shock when we hear a person who's experienced the loss of a loved one and they talk about what the cost of the services are. Funerals are not getting cheaper by any in any way, shape, or form. Uh, there's a myth in our community that the easy way out is always cremation. Cremation has not been readily accepted in our community, but now is more acceptable because more and more people are doing it because they're actually being forced to make that choice of cremation because they have not made necessary preparations in advance. Cremation, cremation. That's what everybody wants to do now because they're ill prepared for when they leave this world.
So the lack of preparation is more financial than documentation
Oh yeah,
that you're seeing.
for certain. Most people opt for cremation because they haven't made the necessary preparation to prepare for a traditional type service, and if that's a good word to use, which we have known for many years as a burial.
Hmm.
The projected cost of funerals, as you watch in many commercials, particularly when people are trying to sell you insurance products, they talk about the rising cost of funerals. Funerals cost $7,000, $8,000 or higher, and that's very true. But you know, when you don't have that, what do? Well, then you have to opt for something like a cremation, where you probably can pay $1,500 or less uh, to remedy or band-aid this situation because it helps you have a final disposition of your loved one's remains, but not necessarily what you may or may not have wanted.
What is that first meeting like when someone loses a loved one, and do you come to them or do they come to you? And what is that first meeting like in terms of the discussion and bringing up the difficult subject of documentation and finances? Or do you go that far in the first meeting? I guess, how does that first meeting go?
Well, the initial meeting is usually always a hard meeting because the reality or the shock of the reality actually begins to really set in. Uh, my loved one has passed away. I am sitting in a room or I'm sitting in my home with a funeral director talking about planning a service, a final service for my loved one. Uh, as you're well aware, there's a lot of emotion that's going on at that time. And the least thing that people want to really do is talk about a whole lot of business. So I think it's very important to let the family kind of lead the direction of that initial meeting based on where they are and what they're feeling about losing their loved one. Uh, if it is a case where death was expected, and even though we think or we know that it's impending, when it actually happens, it's actually a whole different story. You never can really prepare yourself, even though you know in the back of your mind that it's coming. So when it does get to that point, uh, you got to get through all of the issues that the family member is dealing with at that time, especially and more importantly, the shock of the death and denying that their loved one is no longer with us. So in our case, sometimes you can kind of set the stage by explaining that there's some bits of information that we do need in order to prepare a death certificate. So that helps us to kind of open up to some questioning about the vital statistic portion of what we need. Uh, and it could come in the form of a conversation or commentary versus interrogation type of questioning. Tell me about your loved one. And then that helps us to get started. And when you start hearing stories about the individual, helps get some information many times. Like they might say, well, we always had a big family. And I said, how many children were in your family? And then they would talk about situations, life experiences that helps make it a little easier and lighter than just kind of bombarding them with a whole lot of questions about where was your loved one born? What is your loved one's father's name, mother's name, and the like. So the more personal that you can make it, the easier it is. And it makes me feel good at the end of a conference when I've met with the family. And in that conversation, we do talk finances. They said, well, that wasn't bad at all. It wasn't what I thought. And thank you for making this easy for us.
Yeah.
And that's what your goal is, to really make sure that every step of this experience in handling the final services for their loved one is easy. No additional stress being added to the situation that's already stressful. So that's kind of how you have to kind of go, and you have to meet them where they are. You know what I'm saying? Maybe today it's too soon for us to be talking about it. So maybe we'll have an initial brief meeting, and then we'll reschedule and come back and really get down to the nitty gritty of planning the specifics, details.
Hey, David, one of the best pieces of advice I received from a funeral director was in planning for years ahead for my mother's final arrangement, because she was in a situation where we knew that she would never be returning home. And at some point we would have to make those arrangements. The funeral director said, well, let's get started with a pre-plan, okay? And you can plan the finance piece of it over some period of time to make it easier. And it did. It was several years later when she passed, but just that pre-planning piece was very helpful. Do you see that as something that would be helpful to a lot of families in situations these days, even though sometimes it happens so soon you can't plan, but the pre-planning where it's almost foreseen that it's going to happen in several years or something over a period of time?
Yeah, I think pre-planning is one of the best things that anyone can do for their loved ones, because number one, it helps the family to know exactly what it is that you would like.
Yeah.
You have an opportunity to participate in it when usually you don't. So if you have some idea of, well, I already know my favorite color is blue, and I want to have a blue casket, and I want to be buried at this particular cemetery, and all that's all put in writing, and it's so much helpful, and there's no stress at all additionally, because we know what they wanted and we're able to carry out their desires and wishes. Now, the greatest part about it all is if you're in a position to pre-plan and prepay for your services. For instance, if you pre-play and prepay your funeral, say 10 years in advance, you're not faced with any inflationary increases. So if your funeral 10 years ago was $5,000, that same funeral today could be $8,000. So there's this advantage and savings there for the family as well, because you had the forward thinking to go ahead and put that money aside. Now, maybe you don't have maybe you don't have the $5,000 to drop down in a lump sum. Again, there are avenues and ways to do it. You can do it via monthly payments, having a certain amount debited out of a bank account, and you don't even miss it because it's automatically coming out and it's going towards your burial. And by the time you know it, it's all paid for and there's no worry. My burial is taken care of. That's what your family can have the relief in knowing that you cared enough to make sure that you indicated your preferences, you handled your business by putting the monies aside so they don't have to wonder about, well, how are we going to come up with the money and things like that. Too many of our people today, by not pre-planning and by not taking insurance products seriously, GoFundMe is not funeral protection.
Can you say that again, David?
GoFundMe is not a way to take care of your loved one's funeral. Now, granted, there are tragedies that do occur, and well-wishers and supporters want to contribute, but GoFundMe is not a way to plan for a funeral. And especially because I don't know about your knowledge of the experience, and I don't know a lot about it, because if a family says to me they want to have a GoFundMe, I say, wait a minute, think about that. And the reason why I tell them to think about it is because there's a fee attached. GoFundMe gets a percentage of the money. People think they're contributing to your situation, but they're not realizing that somebody's using that money to make a profit off of your unfortunate situation.
What other types of information is necessary to, that you have to gather and the family can help prepare for, a final arrangement?
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. Mostly the death certificate has vital statistic information only in it, along with medical information that certifies why or how the person passed away. And then the most important thing on there is the mode of death. Is it death, a natural cause? Is it an accident? Is it a suicide? Those are important, particularly if people are using insurance products, because makes a difference. Natural causes, you should have no problem with getting a payment. Accidental death, you can expect sometimes, based on the type policy you have, to get a double payment. Then you have a suicide, and in some cases with suicide, you get no benefit. So we have to be better educated about insurance products in general, because most people are unaware that when you take out an insurance policy, your agent says one thing, the home office says something else. If you don't read your policy carefully, you're always disappointed, many families are, to learn that once you take out that policy, most insurance products require you to live 2 years after you take out the policy, so that the policy is not put in an incontestable stage or status, which means that that's the way the insurance company protects himself. So if you take out a policy today, and unfortunately, a month later, suffer a fatal death, you're not guaranteed to get what you think is the death benefit. In some cases, you could very well get it, but in many cases you won't. Your policy will stipulate that you're only entitled to 110% of your return of your premium. So people need to read that and know that. And the biggest fight always between the insurance company and the funeral director is the agent is always saying, yes, you're covered. They're going to pay. And then the family expects, and I don't know too many funeral homes that accept contestable policies. And that's why we don't make a blanket statement and say we accept all insurance policies.
What else makes up final arrangements, and how much of that is handled by you versus the, the family?
Okay, that's a good question. We work with vendors. Obviously, our expertise is handling the decedent and the conduct of the funeral and etc. As far as your incidental items like programs and flowers, we don't personally do them. We refer our clients to a vendor who will take care of that, whose expertise is that gives them what they need as far as that's concerned. It could be a part of the funeral expense, meaning we could have that all on one bill, but we don't try to mix and match. We don't try to print programs because they're competent, qualified people who can take care of that. And then we don't try to do flowers because we do have vendors who are capable in terms of handling those things. We have a list of the vendors that we use that give families choices to consider. Now you mentioned, programs can run the gamut of what's called a basic funeral program, which is a 4-page, just a sheet of paper folded with one photograph on the front and the rest of your content, your obituary, your order of service, and your pallbearers and the resting place on the back. But then we tend to sometimes also want to have more elaborate types of programs, more magazine type, more collage type with a lot of photographs and etc. There would be no way for us to manage and be able to do that on our end. That's why we turn them over to someone with the real true expertise who could handle that for them. Mm-hmm. And that does take time. So going back to documenting, the more information that's already documented and put down, the more photographs, like I hear families say all the time, we're going to get together and go through some photographs today. Oh, you know what I mean? And pick out the pictures. They have volumes and volumes and volumes of pictures to go through. But it's so much simpler if I like a certain photographs of myself and I have certain family members I want to be included, for me to put aside those and say, here's a folder or here's an envelope with the photographs that I would like to see in my funeral program.
Yeah.
How much do you communicate to them what it is that you're going to actually do with the body, other than saying, what do you have a suit in mind or a dress in mind? How much do you communicate the details of what you actually do with the body and preparing it for the funeral?
You don't have to get into a whole lot of specifics with them about the work that we have to do. If we have an image to work from, then that's all the better for us, because all we want them to do when they walk in for the initial viewing of seeing their loved one for the first time, want them to be able to say, she looks beautiful, or she looks like she's sleeping. Yeah. That's all we want to do. And how that happens, they don't have to know that part. But if we just get an idea for them, so that when they leave out, they have a great memory picture of mother, then our work has been accomplished.
You're in my heart, you're in my soul.
Greetings, everyone. I am Deacon Deborah Hicks, and it is an honor to be before you today to discuss how a Stephen minister can bless your life during the time of death and crisis. I'm thankful for Hartford Men United for inviting me here today to share information about the Stephen ministry. Before I start, let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Master, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the good work of the Hartford Men United ministry and the foresight to sponsor this seminar. Bless this gathering. Lord, please let the words of my mouth be of assistance to someone this day. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
And just a little bit about my relationship to the Stephen Ministry program. I've been a proud member of Hartford Memorial Baptist Church for the last 19 years, and that is where I received my Stephen Ministry training. I've been a Stephen minister for a little over 8 years, and I recently completed Stephen leadership training. And I'm very passionate about the Stephen Ministry program because I have experienced first how God worked there through the lives of our caregivers and our care receivers. So let's begin by talking about what Stephen Ministry is. Stephen Ministry is a way to provide confidential, one-on-one Christian care to people who are in a crisis. Stephen Ministry is an extension of pastoral care, and a Stephen Minister has more time to focus on just you. Stephen Ministers are well-trained, spirit-filled caregivers who listen, pray, encourage, and offer the Christ love during a difficult situation. Stephen Ministers believe we are the caregivers, but God is the cure giver. Every Stephen Minister receives 50 hours of training plus continuing education to provide our care receivers the best possible emotional and spiritual care. One of the areas where a Stephen Minister provides distinctively Christian care is when you are grieving. Grief is a journey. Grief is normal because it's how people respond to significant personal loss. Grief is natural in that it is a completely human thing to do. And grief is necessary because grief provides a healthy way to cope with death. I like what Queen Elizabeth said about grief. She said, grief is the price we pay for love. Although grief comes in many forms, today I'm going to focus on two areas of grief that Stephen Ministers support: ministering to those who have experienced the death of a loved one and ministering to those who have been diagnosed with a terminal illness. One of the most difficult types of grief is the death of a loved one. When you are grieving the death of a loved one, a Stephen Minister is there when the calls stop and there are no more cards in your mailbox. When others think you have grieved enough, when you start to ask, where is God? Stephen Ministers are equipped to help you with what is called the 3 phases of grief after death: shock, recall, and rebuilding. Let's talk about shock. Even when you know your loved one is about to die, the grieving person experiences a sense of disbelief and denial in response to the loss. Many people say they feel like they were in a fog, or they don't remember things that happened immediately after the death. And then there's recoil. That's when the reality of death gives way to all the emotions of sadness, crying, feelings of hopelessness, and other raw emotions. And then lastly, there's rebuilding. At this stage, you begin to adapt to your new situation and become ready to move forward in your life. During your grief process, it is natural to go back and forth between every phase of grief. When you are grieving loss through a death, there is nothing like having a Christ-centered person walk with you through your journey who will not judge you or try to fix you. You may have good friends, or you may join a support group, but you may still feel like something is missing. A Stephen Minister can be that missing link. Someone who will listen to you and foster an environment for you to find your own way to whatever wholeness and healing means to you through Christ. Let's talk now a little bit about someone who learns they have a terminal illness. Your Stephen Minister is there for you as you journey through the many phases and grief and emotions. Our care, in many ways, is similar to the care you receive when your loved one dies. We will still be there for you as you experience shock and recoil and the possible rebuilding of your life. Our care is tailored to your needs. Your Stephen Minister will be there for you while you experience the stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. Even though you may not experience all of these stages with your illness, your Stephen Minister is there for whatever it is you experience. And you may not be the only one who is struggling with the things of denial, anger, bargaining, and depression. Your family members may be struggling. You may be wondering how you're going to survive financially. and wondering how your life may be different after your loved one dies, or how your life may be different if your loved one survives. Your family may be wondering how you will survive financially, or how you may all be experiencing feelings of guilt, or how family members may feel guilty because they are taking care of a care receiver for so long. The beauty of Stephen Ministry is everyone can have their own confidential one-to-one support. And a Stephen minister is very cognizant of other needs you may have. Sometimes we can guide you to the resources that help with other issues, such as financial issues. And if the situation warrants, your Stephen minister will be able to refer you to mental health professionals that may be better able to assist you. For terminally ill people, you may need to address their needs through hospice and palliative care, both of which are increasingly being offered to people with a terminal diagnosis. The stigma attached to hospice care is changing as people learn more about the program. Richard Payne, MD, and professor of medicine and divinity at Duke University, describes hospice in this way. Hospice offers the best hope to be alone, to be with family, to have pain controlled, and to be connected to faith and beliefs. We are all entitled and deserving as anyone else to have these hopes fulfilled. And of more comfort, hospice care is provided wherever the patient is living, whether it's at home, in a nursing home, assisted living, or in a freestanding hospice space. Palliative care, which is the other care I spoke about, specializes on focusing on advanced planning and relief of the symptoms of stress of a serious illness, and the same kind of pain management as hospice. However, the difference is that when you're receiving palliative care, you may still receive curative care. A Stephen minister is able to refer you to others who can provide more information on hospice and palliative care programs. And if your doctor agrees, establishing or continuing your relationship with your Stephen minister can provide much needed support during what may be one of the most difficult times of your life. Hartford does have trained individuals to provide more in-depth information on hospice and palliative care programs. I, along with Reverend Maurice Stokes, who is Hartford's Minister for Pastoral Care and the leader of the Stephen Ministry program at Hartford, along with some other Stephen ministers and some of Hartford's ministerial staff, are the most recent members of Hartford to complete training to assist those who are desiring more information on hospice and palliative care. Please contact the church if you would like more information. Stephen ministers also provide distinctively Christian care for many other reasons: loneliness, financial distress, other forms of grief like a loss of a job or a limb, COVID fatigue, just to name a few. And please consider asking someone you know who is grieving or in another crisis in life if they would like to have a Stephen minister. Many times people don't realize that they need help or are willing to ask for help. However, if someone else suggests it to them, they are more willing to respond to that in a positive way. So if you have or know someone like that, and they are willing to explore the opportunity to have a Stephen minister, please contact the church with that information, and someone will contact them as soon as possible. Scripture in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 says, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Walking alongside a care receiver who is grieving is a Stephen minister's gift to them. The care receiver allowing a Stephen minister to walk beside them is their gift to the Stephen minister. But the biggest gift is God working through the caring relationship to heal a care receiver's heart. That is the gift to both the Care and the Stephen Ministry. If you would like more information on how a Stephen minister can support you through grief and any other of life crises, or if you are interested in becoming a Stephen minister yourself, please contact the church at 313-861-1285. Again, that's 313-861-1285. God bless every one of you, and thank you for listening.
So for the Stevens ministers, is it sort of do you guys proactively reach out to, families as they get news of loved ones passing, or is it only the person has to reach out to you guys and that triggers the need?
Well, normally the person will reach out to a Stephen minister, or someone who knows the person or sees that person struggling will suggest Stephen ministry to them. So we don't attend all the funerals, and we generally just have the receivers come to us. But the idea is to promote Stephen ministry through a lot of different channels so that people will have a better understanding of what Stephen ministers provide, so that they could see and have an opportunity to know when someone might need a Stephen minister.
Hey, Deborah, when my mom passed about 8 years ago, I received a very impactful book called that the church sent to me. And I was so moved by it that I now keep about 100 of them and I hand them out to folks outside of Hartford when they're going through an end of life situation. My question to you is Stephen's ministry prepared to provide this assistance to non-Hartford members?
Absolutely. Our ministry is as far reaching as the people who know about it is. And those books that you mentioned, actually, we have the ability to provide those books to them as well. So if we see that they need those kinds of things, because I had those books myself when I was grieving, I think that it's a wonderful opportunity to just come to terms with some of the issues following the different stages of grief. But the best part about it is the Stephen minister themselves will help you, and they can help anybody.
What advice do you give people that are kind of going through those phases? What seems to be the biggest thing that really helps? Is it the words that you say of comfort, or is it just being your presence and showing concern, or a combination?
It's a combination, but more is just being there for that person. When you go through something that traumatic, and when you start dealing with the estate and things of that nature, just having someone there, someone who won't judge you because you may be crying or saying, well, this isn't really that hard, or not showing the compassion that you need. A Stephen minister is just there for you. So there are ways that we are trained to help, and the ways that we want to help that are just natural instinct, and that we are there for the person to talk to. We offer prayer, and we offer hope, and we offer just the kind of whatever the care receiver seems to feel, we seem to feel that the care receiver needs, or whatever the care receiver expresses to us that they might need. So the fact of us just being there, you'd be surprised at what a comfort that is to people when they're grieving. It's a relief actually to know that someone is available, and you don't have to worry about a thing, because their care is strictly for you.
I think there are some restrictions that you guys do have as it relates to age. Anyone under the age of 18, is that the case, or can you kind of explain that? If someone who's a teenager loses a loved one or is experiencing grief, are there some restrictions on what a Stephen minister can
Yes, I'm glad you brought that point up, Ron. Stephen ministers only minister to people over 18, to adults. Now, we realize, of course, that children do have a need, and they do have some things they are grieving, and very serious things. And in that case, I would refer them to our minister for the youth, which is Reverend Jonathan Fields Betts. He is really good at getting the resources that young people may need, and the kinds of support that they could get. But for legal reasons, and really, Stephen Minister wouldn't be able to talk to a child or someone that's under 18 who cannot give consent for the things that they're about to say.
Giving me something to believe. You always set my mind at ease.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Steele, and I have the honor of being a deacon for about 7 years now at Hartford Memorial Baptist Church. And today I'm going to touch on the basics of developing a financial strategy that will carry you through your lifetime. Retirement. I have a great definition of retirement. It's called the longest vacation of your life. Because basically that's what it is. You're not working anymore. You're free to do whatever you want to do if you are when you're on vacation. However, like most of us, what do we do when we're on vacation? We spend money. So it is incumbent upon us to save as much money as possible so that we can make our retirement as comfortable as possible. Choosing when to retire, however, can be a difficult decision that involves a number of issues. I've known people who were in such a hurry to retire, but once they retired, they really hadn't developed any hobbies or special interests. So consequently, that retirement was short-lived and they went back to work. So it's important that you have something to look forward to in retirement. One of my clients was a youth football coach. After he retired, he was able to devote a lot of his time to his youth football program. Another one of my clients wanted to learn how to cook. So after they retired, they went to cooking school, and let me tell you, they are excellent cooks. So basically what I'm trying to say is have a plan in retirement. I mean, just don't make not working your goal. Goal should be, what can I do for myself now that I don't have to work for someone else? Taxes. Oh, how we love to pay them. Or, oh, how we love to avoid them. Now, because your retirement does not mean you can't pay, you're not going to pay any taxes anymore. No, you have to do that. And taxes are something that can affect your retirement. Many people overlook the impact of taxes when planning for their retirement. I guess a lot of people think that I'm not making as much money, so I'm not paying as much taxes, which is true, but you're still paying some taxes. And we don't know for sure what the tax rates will be when we decide to retire. You can predict what they can be, and basically predict on how they will have an impact on your future cash flow. Here's an interesting fact. Americans will collectively spend more on taxes in 2020 than they did on food, clothing, and housing combined. Think about that. I'm going to repeat that. Americans will collectively spend more on taxes in 2020 than they will on food, clothing, and housing combined. In fact, the average American has to work 100 days each year just to pay off their federal, local, and municipal tax. So a resident of the city of Detroit has to work 100 days, which is into April, Uncle Sam, the state of Michigan, and the city of Detroit before they actually start my money for themselves. This is a wonderful thing, living longer. In the old days, our parents typically lived to age 65. Typically, they worked to age 62. So they had a 3-year retirement window. The good Lord called them home. Today, that's not the case. People are retiring earlier. Some are retiring as early as age 55 and living much longer, possibly 90, 95, or even 100. So your retirement timeline now is a lot longer than it used to be. And as you look at the slide there, if you are 65 and married, there's a 50% chance either you and your spouse will live. Actually, I think that 50% is pretty low. I would say maybe 60%, 65% chance that one of you will live to that age with the advances in healthcare that we have now. Of course, with the advances in healthcare, it comes at a cost, and that's a real dollar cost. So along with saving for your retirement, saving for having the proper income that you're going to need in retirement, you also need to save for the proper health care that you're going to need in retirement as well. Being careful. As you plan your retirement, do not let fear, desperation, or the need to catch up financially push you into any hasty investment decision. How many times have you heard at a gathering this guy or this woman bragging about how they receive the return of their investment of 45, 50, 70%? So here you are, you're close to retirement, you're a little bit short, and you need to make up that gap. So you go over and talk to that guy and you try to find out how he did it. Well, sometimes people will inadvertently rush right into a scam or a pyramid. Again, you want to make sure the investment professional that you're dealing with is reputable and honest. And the overwhelming number of people in this business are. However, you can run into a bad egg or a bad apple. So do not ever base your retirement planning decisions on fear or desperation. In all legitimate investments, higher returns are accompanied by bias. So if you want a really big gain, you have to risk a really big loss. That's the nature of the investment. So be wary of anyone who claims they can sell you a product that offers great reward without a great risk. And I'll talk to you about a few points to keep in mind when you make any financial decision. Number one, anyone can claim to be a financial consultant or investment counselor. That doesn't mean that they've had special training, expertise, or credentials necessary to help you make the right decisions. Ask about their licenses, what type of licenses they have, what professional designations they have, and also where they've worked before and where they're working currently. Always understand your investments and never be afraid to ask any questions. Always monitor your investments. Always take a look at your statements and become an informed investor. The more you know, the better off you're going to be. When you are dealing with a couple, whether it be husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, you should not be, either one of the spouses should know the financial history of the other spouse. When I say spouse, also if you're in a long-term committed relationship as well. There are some people who are, in a relationship for 10 years and never get married. But you should at least know the financial health of your spouse. And there shouldn't be any secrets so that you're not blindsided when something comes nowhere. No one knows when they're going to die. No one knows when they're going to get sick. So the best thing to do is be prepared. When it comes to your finances, your spouse should know what you have and where it is, and vice versa. You should know what your spouse has and where located. The third thing you want to do is find out who to talk to, because most people tend to deal with one person over their financial life as long as they're still working as a retired. And when that person retired, more than likely they're going to refer him to someone that they know, so they can still have that contact. If you're able to get a name of that particular person, that professional will probably know everything about that spouse or significant other. They will know when they first started the investment plan or the life insurance policy, how much they put in, what the death benefit is, or how much this investment is supposed to generate on a monthly basis. So if you could, again, find out a contact person for your spouse or your significant other, that should solve everything. But you should at least know where the money trail begins.
Giving me all I need. Your world is my.
Hello, my name is John Bradley, and I am the president of the business ministry at the Hartford Memorial Baptist Church in Detroit, Michigan. In addition to that, I'm also an independent associate with Legal Shield, which provides a nationwide network of attorneys that benefit families and small businesses, commercial truck drivers, and the like. Today, I'll be sharing with you our presentation about estate planning. Please watch and enjoy.
So the first big question is, what is your estate? Well, put simply, your estate is all the assets you have accumulated, or in other words, your stuff. That includes everything from the home that you own to the lamp and couch in that home. It includes your bank accounts. It includes anything that you may have an ownership interest in, like a business. Will even include your motor vehicles or a recreational vehicle if you happen to own those. Basically, it's everything that you own that something needs to happen with in the event that you should pass. It's not going to happen just automatically. Something needs to be put in place to make sure that your assets go somewhere. And we'll talk about the systems that are put in place, like a will, like a trust, designed to make sure that your assets go somewhere, as well as some of the other mechanisms by which, even if you don't do anything, some things may pass to either your heirs or to someone that you've designated as a beneficiary. But overall scheme, what is your estate? Well, it's everything that you have, and we have to decide what's going to happen with it. The three main goals of estate planning are to manage your affairs during your lifetime, to distribute your estate after your death, and third, and probably most important, to minimize the problems for your loved ones after you should pass. Most of us don't like to think about the concept that our family may fall into tension or anger or have difficulties following our passing, but the reality is this can happen. And so it's incredibly important to have some plan in place to make sure that your family has a smooth transition as they administer your estate and distribute your assets after you're gone. So why do you need estate planning? Well, to make your wishes known about who's going to receive the things that you want. Also, you get to select who's going to administer your estate, or potentially who's going to serve as the guardian of your minor children, should you have minor children. If you don't designate who these folks are, A court is going to have to make a decision about who's going to administer your estate, or even who's going to be the guardian of your children. Now, a court may do a great job or do its best job, but that doesn't mean that they're going to select the person that you would have chosen or that you would trust most with your affairs. Important to put these things in place so that it isn't left up to some third party. Additionally, you might need estate planning because you can make your wishes known in a physician's directive, sometimes called a healthcare power of attorney or a living will. Again, this can relate to decision-making that is made for you if you should need life-sustaining treatment and are unable to make those decisions yourself. And finally, to designate who is your power of attorney to help you address some financial matters that may come up in your life. 3 of the estate planning challenges folks face, well, finding the right attorney, not knowing who to call, not knowing where to turn, actually getting it done in a timely fashion that isn't too expensive, and finally choosing the right options for you with regard to your will or any of your other estate planning options. Again, contact your Legal Shield provider. These are all things that will be taken care of for you. They will select the attorney for you. They will help you get it done timely, and they will help you select the options that make the most sense for you and your estate. These are some of the concepts and terms that we're going to walk through now. We're going to take them one at a time to talk a little bit more about what they are and why they're valuable. So first we have this term intestate. You'll often hear of someone dying intestate. And when we say that, all we mean is they died without a will, they died without any estate planning at all. When this happens, something still needs to happen with your stuff. So each state has designated by statute or by state law how your estate will be distributed. It's good to know that there's something in place to make sure things go somewhere after you pass. However, this is generally the absolute least desirable mechanism by which to pass your assets. The reason for that is, again, a third party, the state legislature, is making that determination, and it can vary state to state, and it can have some adverse and negative consequences relative to what you may have wanted. So sometimes these assets will just pass to your spouse, or they may pass to your minor children if your spouse has predeceased you. But if you have other things in place, or have had other life experiences that could impact how this works. For instance, if you have a spouse from a prior marriage, or if you have minor children from a prior marriage, each state is a little different in dictating who's going to get what and in what percentage. Passing this way can also create tax consequences for your spouse. It can create issues because the fees and costs of passing through probate without a will are usually higher than they are if you pass through probate with a will or have other estate planning in place. If you have minor children, it's not going to address who you want to care for them or handle their financial affairs. Again, a court is going to make a decision about who's going to be the representative of your estate or who's going to be the guardian of your children. It could also impact the benefits of a special needs trust. Very important to avoid this if you can. Generally, passing without a will, passing without any kind of estate planning, the least desirable option. Powers of attorney and healthcare directive. Power of attorney, as I mentioned before, is really just an instrument that allows someone else to help you with your financial matters. This may be because you need someone to go to the bank for you. It may be that you need someone to sign contracts for you. It may be that you need someone to operate for you because there's some geographic limitation, but you need them to be able to do something in another location. Generally, this just allows someone to act on your behalf with regard to financial matters. The healthcare directives is different than a power of attorney, and it has a little bit different name in many states. Some states call it a medical power of attorney. Some states call it a healthcare directive. But basically what this does is it designates a third party to make medical decisions for you. Designates someone who can work with doctors in the event that you're unable to make decisions due to being incapacitated. Jointly held assets aren't always thought of as a estate planning term, but they really are. Simplified, all a jointly held asset is an asset that's held by 2 or more people. Maybe the simplest version of this that we're all familiar with is a joint bank account. So if you have a joint bank account where 2 parties are named on the account, both have access to all the money. If one should pass, the survivor that still has access to all the money. And by virtue of the fact that it was a jointly held account, they now have control over the full amount of funds in that account. There's no will necessary. There's no probate necessary. They automatically get those funds. Another common occurrence is a jointly held property. Sometimes you'll hear of real estate being held in joint tenancy. Again, if one of the parties should pass, say a spouse, the surviving spouse automatically takes ownership of the full amount of the property or 100% interest in the property. There's no need for probate. There's no need for a will. Beneficiary designation is another form of estate planning in which an asset can pass outside your estate, regardless of the provisions in your will. A very common occurrence here with regard to life insurance. Generally, with a life insurance policy, you'll designate someone to be the person that gets paid or the beneficiary for that policy. And once proof is provided that you have passed, that will be paid out immediately rather than having to pass through probate or having to be dispersed through your will. Again, very useful instrument. It allows things to pass outside your estate and happen automatically. The last will and testament, this is really the big one and the one that we'll be focusing on in the second half of the presentation, and it's the one that is provided for under your Legal Shield benefit. A last will and testament designates to whom you give your estate. It also designates who's going to serve as your personal representative, that is the person who actually gathers up your property in order to disperse it to the folks that you've designated as the recipients of those assets, and also designates the guardian for your minor children. Put simply, it's just the document you put in place to make sure all your stuff goes where you want it to go and how you want it to go. An important concept for the last will and testament to make sure everybody understands is that you need one will per person. So if you're married, each of you needs a separate will and testament. You cannot have any kind of joint will between the two of you. Also, one other misconception folks sometimes have is they think a will avoid probate. It's not generally the case in most states. A will generally still needs to be filed with a probate court and pass through probate. The reality, though, is the reason folks think that is because the process when you have a will is so much simpler than if you pass things through probate without a will. Again, the costs are less and the stress and the time needed from family members or your personal executive or your personal representative or your executor is much less as well. So it is very favorable to have a last will and testament. It makes the probate process much easier, but doesn't necessarily avoid it. One other important concept, the will questionnaire, which I will cover in a little bit, is not your will. This is merely a questionnaire we're producing to make generating your will very simple. I'll talk more about that in a few moments, but it's important to complete that will questionnaire and return it to your provider firm. And finally, one tip, safeguard your will in a place with all your other important legal documents. Remember, ultimately, it's up to you, not your attorney, not the provider firm, not your CPA, to be responsible for the safekeeping of your will. Make sure you have it someplace safe. Make sure you have copies of it as well, and make sure that the folks that you've designated to serve in important roles relative to your will know where a copy of your will can be found. Living trusts are instruments that can distribute your assets similar to a will. These can help eliminate or reduce estate taxes and sometimes avoid probate. They can be helpful in certain family circumstances, but they're not always the most useful tool. Sometimes folks think they want a trust when in reality, a will may accomplish the goals of their estate as well or even better and save them some costs.
Very much. The need to have a will is paramount, especially in the times of this pandemic. We all have heard of horror stories where families have been separated because they haven't had access to visitation while they're in the hospital suffering from COVID, and there was no estate plan in place. Be proactive and take care of your family and leave that love letter to them that they deserve. Thank you very much. These documents are state specific, and also if there's a change in your marital status or if you move, that could impact the status of those documents. For an estate planning attorney, contact the State Bar of Michigan at 800-968-0738 for a referral. Also, if you classify as low income or if you're senior, free legal services are available through Lakeshore Legal Aid at 888-783-8190.
Just wanna be faithful.
Well, hello there, and congratulations to those of you who have made it to this far in our course material. I hope you were pleased with what you've seen, but we talked about the name of the course, and the objective of the course is Grave Matters, Leaving a Legacy, Not a Burden. So now we're ready to get to the most important part of the course, which is how do I leave a legacy and not a burden? It's important that we take the information that we've shared with you and move it now into action. By recap, you know there have been several information modules that have been presented to you with professionals with expertise in their various areas of influence. They have taken their time to make this information available to you, understanding that each of you has an individual situation of your own that will require you to proceed to the next step, the most important step. And what I want to share with you today is a process for how we take the most important step. First of all, there's a lot of information that has been provided, but we know you might not recall all of it, but we will provide for you at the end of this class a checklist of many items that we feel are important based on our experience in the past and the experience of our professional presenters that you should assemble together in a single location. Let's call it a binder, a 3-ring binder, that you can leave for your loved ones so that upon your passing, and it could be sudden, particularly in this area of pandemic and COVID-19, we've seen so much of that, that your loved ones won't have to search around and muddle around through many individual items that you have in various locations. It's all right there. Believe me, I know from experience that that takes a lot of burden off of your loved ones. So here's what we want you to do. First, we want you to be intentional about this next step. We want you to establish a timeline, a goal to have this next step wrapped up within the next 30 to 60 days. And you say, what is the wrap up? What is the deliverable? The deliverable is a 3-ring binder, probably with index tabs, that would contain all the types of information that are on the checklist. The checklist will contain some information that's readily available to you. Who your contacts are, your name, your marital status, your birth certificate, things of that nature. It's a matter of just putting it all in one place. Some of it will require that you work with a professional, at least get started working with a professional on developing legal documents that you can leave for your loved ones. Now, it's all of the presenters have said that you may contact them for information, and certainly you may contact me as well. And we will provide for you an appendix to this class with how you can reach those individuals in the areas of expertise that they have. It's important that you know that each of your situations is unique and different. So Hartford Church is not in a position to provide legal guidance, recommendations, or specific strategies. That is up to the professionals that you will avail yourselves of, either the ones we suggest, or there are some zero cost and low cost organizations that have been recommended by AARP, and we will share with you also in the appendix that list of organizations. Finally, we want you to have an accountability partner. An accountability partner should help you along the way, and it can be one of the other registrants on this class. It can be someone in your family, a significant other or spouse. It can be a very reliable adult child, but it's someone who will help you stay on course to complete this most important step. We know statistics show that more than half of the people in this country don't take this step, although most of them wish that they would. They have things that they would like to leave for their loved ones, but they don't take that next step. So we want you to move from inertia, comfort, knowledge to action. To help you out along the way, we're going to schedule a follow-up session in mid-April, about 60 days from when you might get started sometime in February. At that follow-up session, it'll be a check-in just to see how you are doing and to encourage you to stay on that path if you have not already completed it. At that session, we're also going to partner with another organization, the African American Church Empowerment Project, and they're going to provide some additional valuable information on a very specific topic, which is advanced healthcare directives. You'll get more information on that and how to register for that in the days ahead. So let's get started. Congratulations on making it this far. And now the real work is ready to begin. And we're going to be there with you every step of the way. And hopefully we will be able to be successful in meeting our course objective of leaving a legacy, not a burden. So let's get on with it. Thank you.